The music world has been home to a tremendous number of success stories. Countless talented men and women have been able to harness their abilities to rise from rags to riches and see their dreams come to life. It's also home to some of the most bizarre, gruesome, and upsetting deaths of dreams and the lives of the dreamers. On today's special episode of The Right Track, Nikki and myself, the Critical Android, will be sharing with you 20 of the most gruesome and bizarre deaths from across the music industry.
Marvin Gaye will be remembered for leaving a lasting legacy on the musical industry. From his days on the Motown label with songs like How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You and I Heard It Through the Grapevine, to his later day sensuality of Sexual Healing. Sadly, he'll also be remembered for the circumstances surrounding his death. The day was April 1st, 1984. After verbally trying to break up a fight between his mother Alberta and father Marvin Sr., the younger Marvin Gaye had to resort to physically fighting his father in order to protect his mom. Though he was successful at the time, and his father left the room, he quickly came back into it, carrying a .38 Smith & Wesson pistol. Marvin Sr. fired twice. The first shot was pointed directly at his son's chest, going through his right lung, heart, and other vital organs, such as the liver, stomach, and left kidney. The second shot was made at an even closer range, as Marvin's father stepped toward his son, shooting him again point blank. Marvin's siblings, who lived in their brother's guest house, heard the shots, and the police were contacted. Marvin Gaye Sr. was arrested, while Marvin Gaye Jr. was taken to the hospital. He was pronounced dead on arrival at 1:01 p.m. from his wounds. In a rather dark twist of fate, the gun that killed him was purchased by Marvin Gaye himself as a gift for his father.
The German progressive rock band Triumvirate is not well known in the United States, but those who are familiar with them can attest to the high quality of their musicianship and dynamic sound. The band achieved their most noteworthy success between 1974 and 1975, when they were being fronted by vocalist and bassist Helmut Kohlin. His success with Triumvirate and differing creative desires spurred him to leave the band later in '75 and pursue a solo career. Incidentally, it would be his solo career that would indirectly lead to his death. Kohlin began working in the studio in late 1976 on his debut record, work that would continue into May of 1977. On the 3rd of that month, Kohlin went out to his garage to listen to some of the session tapes in the cassette player of his car. But with the engine of the car running and the garage door closed, deadly undetectable carbon monoxide gas quickly built up through the garage. Kohlin began to feel woozy, and before he could fully realize what was happening, lost consciousness and died. Like a number of other musicians cut down early in their life, he was only 27 years old. Mike Edwards is primarily known for his tenure with Electric Light Orchestra, in which he was a cellist across their second album ELO 2, their third on the Third Day, and finally El Dorado. After he left the band, his talents were still in demand due to his skill and abilities on the cello, with one of his longest-running gigs being a member of the Devon Baroque Orchestra, a musical ensemble based out of Devon, the English city in which he lived. Sadly, on November 3, 2010, Edwards died in a highly bizarre traffic accident. While traveling down Road A381 between the rural villages of Harburtonford and Holwell, a 1,200-pound bale of hay began rolling down the hillsides that surrounded the road and struck the van that Edwards was driving, killing him. 2 men were charged with negligence regarding the stray hay bale, but were later found to be not at fault for the odd but tragic accident. In 1989, Los Angeles rock band Great White finally hit it big with their cover of the Ian Hunter song Once Bitten, Twice Shy. As so often happens, the years went by, fame faded, and the band was relegated to touring the club circuits across the US. But in 2003, Great White entered the mainstream news again, in the worst possible way. On the night of February 20th, 2003, Great White was set to perform at The Station, a nightclub located in West Warwick, Rhode Island. The band was set to take the stage at 11 p.m. and began their set shortly after the top of the hour. Seconds into their first song, a pyrotechnic spark display was launched to accompany the music, but it very quickly became evident that something was very wrong. The shower of sparks ignited the soundproof acoustic foam that lined the back of the stage and climbed to the ceiling. While members in the audience thought this was just part of the act, Great White themselves stopped playing, with their vocalist Jack Russell stating himself that the situation was, quote, not good. In only a minute, the entire stage was engulfed in a fire that was spreading to all other areas of the building. It only took 5.5 minutes for the entire club to be set aflame. Due to the building's lack of a sprinkler system, the excessive intensity of the pyrotechnics for an area that small, and the high flammability of the acoustic foam, 100 people were tragically killed that night from a combination of toxic smoke inhalation, the fire itself, and being trampled. Included among the perished was Great White's guitarist, Ty Longley. Sadly, a very similar incident happened on October 30th, 2015, in Bucharest, Romania. Metalcore band Goodbye to Gravity was taking the stage at about midnight, but again a pyrotechnic display caused a highly flammable acoustic foam around the stage to catch on fire. 64 people had their lives taken during this tragedy, with Goodbye to Gravity losing 2 of their guitarists in the blaze, and in the weeks to follow would also lose their bassist and drummer to injuries sustained on that awful night.
Beloved Mexican-American singer, actress, and fashion designer Selena Quintanilla Perez, otherwise known as just Selena, became quickly known as the Queen of Tejano music and the Tejano Madonna for her style, poise, and voice. It's hard to picture it now, but back in the early 90s, Selena's meteoric rise to fame was inspirational to Latino and Latinas throughout all North America. Unfortunately, she would be taken from the world just as quickly as she became a voice in it. In 1991, Selena's father, who was also her manager, agreed to Selena's request to start a fan club, feeling that the time was perfectly suited for it. 31-year-old Yolanda Saldivar was a Tejano music fan who became a massive fan of Selena after seeing a live performance of hers. Saldivar had contacted Selena's manager several times, asking about the possibility of starting a fan club, and was eventually granted the request. Her success in running the club helped her grow closer both physically and emotionally to Selena, resulting in the singer seeing Saldivar as both a friend and an important part of her career's expansion. In 1994, Selena's success led to the opening of several clothing boutiques. With her manager unable to run them and her career at the same time, it was decided to appoint Saldivar as the operating manager of the boutiques. As part of this, Saldivar was given access to corporate credit cards and bank accounts, all of which she ended up exploiting for personal use. By the time 1995 arrived, problems were beginning to show. Reports were coming in from the boutiques that Saldivar was a vicious person with an equally vicious temperament. Financial reports were coming back with inexplicable losses, and fan club members were complaining that despite having paid their membership fees, they weren't receiving the gifts and merchandise promised to members. Selena's father quickly became suspicious of Saldivar, banned her from contacting his daughter, and fired her from her positions. However, Selena's kind heart and trusting nature prevented her from believing that Saldivar could possibly want to damage her career. So on March 31st, 1995, when Saldivar asked Selena to meet her at a motel to help her seek medical attention for a claimed sexual assault, she agreed. After a visit to the hospital suggested that Saldivar was lying about being raped, the two women returned to the motel, upon which time other guests reported hearing a loud argument over business matters. The argument was followed by a loud bang, similar to the sound of a car backfiring. It was, in fact, the sound of Saldivar firing a bullet from her .38 revolver into Selena's back as the singer was trying to flee the room. The bullet severed a major artery, resulting in massive blood loss. Police were quickly called to the scene, and authorities cornered Selena's killer. Saldivar threatened suicide, creating a brief standoff, but she was ultimately arrested and brought to trial. She proposed the defense that the shooting was unintentional and the gun went off by accident. However, the model of revolver she used required at least 11 pounds of pressure to fire, meaning the only shot that could have been made would have been fully intended. Yolanda Saldivar was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison, with an option for parole in 2025. The Mexican-American community still mourns the loss of Selena on the anniversary of her death to this day.
We've previously spoken of Kirsty MacColl on this channel, the English vocalist who passed away in December of 2000 in a diving accident when she pushed her 2 children out of the way of an oncoming motorboat, only to be hit by the boat herself and killed. But there's also the story of spirit guitarist Randy California, who met an equally tragic end on January 2nd, 1997. Randy and his 12-year-old son Quinn were visiting the home of Randy's mother in Hawaii when they decided to go swimming off the shore by her home. As can sometimes happen near shorelines, a rip current formed that began dragging a panicked Quinn out deeper into the ocean. Randy quickly took notice and entered the current in an attempt to save his son. He did successfully push him to shore, but the fatigue of swimming against the current exhausted California and caused him to drown. The sad part is that rip currents can be easily escaped by swimming at a 90-degree angle to the force of the motion, as long as one is keeping their cool. Sadly, Randy either wasn't aware of this, or was too upset at the time to know what was going on, and sacrificed his life for the good of his son. Folk rock Americana band House of Freaks had a brief but somewhat successful run of singles in the United States from 1987 to 1991. The duo of vocalist and guitarist Brian Harvey and percussionist Johnny Hott racked up 3 top 40 hits on the Billboard Modern Rock charts, and later split up to pursue their own respective projects. No one could have ever predicted, though, that Harvey would wind up as a victim in one of the most gruesome murder sprees of the 2000s. Across the period of a week in January of 2006, Ricky Javan Gray and his nephew, Ray Joseph Dandridge, were responsible for the deaths of 7 people. On the first day of the new year of 2006, Brian Harvey, his wife Catherine, and their young daughters Stella and Ruby, aged 9 and 4, were found in the basement of their still-burning home. They were bound with electrical cords and tape, all with visible signs of having been beaten and slashed. None of the 4 died from the fire. Brian and his wife were killed by being struck in the head with a blunt object, as was Stella. Ruby, though, died of her stab wounds, one of which had punctured her lung. 5 days later, another family was killed when their house was broken into. The Baskerville Tuckers lost 3 innocent family members that day, through a combination of slashed throats, plastic bags placed over their heads, and strangulation via duct tape wrapped around their necks. Police received a call from a friend of one of the Baskervilles who believed they knew who might be responsible for the rash of home invasion killings, which led them to Ricky Gray and Ray Dandridge. Dandridge ended up pleading guilty to his involvement in the crimes and received a life-in-prison sentence for his plea. Gray, however, pled not guilty and was not only found guilty by trial, but sentenced to death. While he would have been executed in March of 2016, a stay of execution was issued so that Gray's case could be appealed to the Supreme Court.
To many music fans, Cliff Burton is known as the bassist for pioneering metal band Metallica on their first 3 albums. But to metalheads and more ardent music listeners, he was also known as one of the greatest bass players of all time. In the early fall of 1986, Metallica was in the middle of a European tour in support of their popular breakthrough album, Master of Puppets. Unfortunately for the band, the bus they were using for the tour was equipped with terribly uncomfortable bunks to sleep in. To prevent an argument over who would get to use the more comfortable bed, lead guitarist Kirk Hammett proposed a quick card game between him and Burton, which the bassist reportedly won by drawing the ace of spades. In victory, he claimed the use of Hammett's bunk, forcing the other band members to have to sleep close to the front of the bus. On the morning of September 27th, several miles outside the city of Ljungby, Sweden, the driver lost control of the vehicle, causing the bus to skid off-road and begin to flip. Burton was ejected from his bed and out the window as the vehicle tumbled, unfortunately landing in its path. Pinned under the bus, a rescue attempt was made as responders attempted to lift the bus with machinery, but ultimately resulted in the bus slipping from the lift and landing on Burton a second time. It remains unclear as to whether he was killed by the first or second impact. Either way, Cliff Burton was pronounced dead on the scene. Metallica carried on with a new bassist, but the legacy of Burton loomed large, with the band dedicating the song To Live Is To Die to him off of their next album, And Justice for All.
Sandy Denny holds the distinction of being the only guest vocalist to ever appear on a Led Zeppelin album, with her backing vocal performance on the Battle of Evermore off of Led Zeppelin's fourth release. Outside of her guest spot, Denny was more well known for being the lead singer of English folk band Fairport Convention. Though the folk genre is not often considered a breeding ground for drug abuse and alcohol, the latter was a demon that plagued Denny for some time. In 1977, following her departure from Fairport Convention, the songstress gave birth to her daughter, but likely due to her alcohol problems, seemed to care very little for her child. In March of 1978, Denny fell down a set of stairs, striking her head on the concrete at the base. The incident didn't seem to cause any need for alarm, but Denny did start suffering from incredibly painful headaches, a syndrome her doctor gave her a powerful painkiller for, known as dystalgesic. As the start of April came and went, Denny's behavior began to grow erratic. So erratic that her husband was deeply troubled by this, and in concern for the life of their daughter, took the child and left the country without informing Sandy of this. If she experienced any heartache and distress from this, it was short-lived. She fell into a coma on April 17th and passed away 4 days later. Her cause of death was listed as a mid-brain hemorrhage brought on from blunt force trauma resulting from her fall down the stairs. Despite her passing, she remains an influential figure in the British folk rock community.
Per Olin, otherwise known as Dead, was the lead vocalist and lyricist for the Norwegian black metal band Mayhem. Severely bullied as a child, Olin grew fascinated with death and embraced it with a twisted sense of glee. After feeling like his original band, Morbid, was going nowhere, he contacted the members of the already established band Mayhem, sending them a demo tape that also included a crucified mouse. Mayhem guitarist Øystein Arseth, otherwise known as Euronymous, not only took a liking to Olin's style and interests, he became fascinated by it. Olin lived up to his Dead nickname by using makeup to appear as a corpse on stage, and would frequently inflict self-harm while performing, sometimes necessitating a great degree of bandaging. This behavior continued offstage, to where many of the band members' friends couldn't tell if Dead was actively trying to commit suicide, or was merely embracing a dangerous lifestyle out of his morbid tastes. Øystein's fascination with Dead and his actions continued to grow to the point where some believe he was actively pushing Olin towards committing suicide, and on April 8, 1991, what was perhaps inevitable took place. The band had purchased a house in the woods that they were living and writing music together in. That day in April, Olin was left alone when Euronymous decided to go out for a bit, and he came back to find that the house was locked. Without his key on him, he had to climb through the window. Almost immediately thereafter, he saw the grisly sight of Dead's suicide. Olin had cut both his wrists and his neck with a knife, and followed those actions by shooting himself in the forehead with a shotgun. But Euronymous' reaction to the death of his bandmate is even more disturbing than the suicide itself. Before contacting the police about the suicide, Euronymous went to the store to buy a camera which after tampering with the crime scene to enhance the look, he used to photograph the body. Beyond this, Euronymous gathered up bits of Olin's skull, which he would later use to make necklaces to give out to musicians that he deemed, quote, worthy. These actions greatly upset the band's bassist, Necro Butcher, who could no longer stomach the dark and twisted nature of the band, resulting in him leaving and ending his friendship with Euronymous. But the story doesn't end there. In order to replace Necro Butcher in the studio, fellow black metal artist Varg Vikernes was contacted and invited to play with the group. He did, and formed a friendship between himself and Euronymous. But the friendship turned into something venomous 2 years later. On August 10th, 1993, an argument broke out between the two bandmates that resulted in Euronymous being found the next day with 23 stab wounds, 16 of which were in the back. Vikernes claimed that Euronymous attacked him and claimed to capture him, torture him through electrocution, and film the entire procedure. Vikernes was found guilty and sentenced to the maximum number of years possible in Norway, 21 years. It's not often remembered by casual music fans that Mick Jagger wasn't the original frontman for the Rolling Stones. Before Jagger and Richards clicked together as songwriters, Brian Jones was the band's lead singer and multi-instrumentalist. Being overshadowed by the combination of Jagger and Richards put Jones from his leadership role and deep into the throes of drugs and alcohol. Brian Jones' drug problem gradually escalated until they began affecting his ability to play in the band. In June of 1969, Jones was kicked out of the band, an event which only quickened the pace of his downward spiral. On the night of July 2nd, and into the early morning of July 3rd, Jones's girlfriend stepped outside to find Jones's still body at the bottom of the swimming pool. After pulling him out and believing him to have a pulse, she contacted emergency service. Doctors reporting to the scene found no signs of life in him, and he was pronounced dead in the early morning hours of July 3rd. Despite being only 27 years old, the coroner's report indicated that Jones had extensive enlargements of both the liver and heart, indicating just how bad his drug abuse problem was. Rumors have circulated time and again over the years that Brian Jones was murdered, but despite an official reinvestigation of the case, the official cause of death still stands as death by misadventure.
Throughout the 70s and 80s, Jeff Porcaro was known as one of the greatest session drummers in the business. Eventually he would join up with the band Toto, where he helped propel them to fame with his playing on hits such as Africa and Rosanna. But outside of Toto, Jeff was incredibly active, playing with dozens of different musicians, and remained consistently in demand. On the morning of August 5th, 1992, Jeff was tending to his garden, spraying some insecticide on his plants in order to prevent them from being damaged by the invasive creatures. Unfortunately, due to an allergic reaction to the insecticide, Porcaro became ill and died later that night. Coroner's report stated the cause of death as a heart attack from arterial sclerosis exacerbated by cocaine use. This notion is refuted, however, by the friends, family, and bandmates of Porcaro, who state he was not an avid drug user by any means. Regardless, the world remains deprived of his considerable talents.
Guitarist Daryl Abbott was more popularly known as Dimebag Darrell, one of the founding members of the bands Pantera and Damage Plan. Inspired heavily by Ace Frehley of Kiss and Tony Iommi of Black Sabbath, Darrell was regarded as one of the best metal guitarists of his time, if not all time. During a Damage Plan concert on December 8, 2004, a former Marine, 25-year-old Nathan Gale, approached the stage as the band was beginning their set. He brandished a 9mm Beretta pistol. and immediately shot Dimebag Darrell in the head 3 times. Shots continued, though, as Gale appeared to want more people dead. The band's head of security tried to tackle the gunman, but was killed by gunfire as well. One of the fans in the crowd, not realizing Darrell was already dead, tried administering CPR to the fallen guitarist, and was also subsequently killed by Gale. A hostage situation broke out as John Brooks, the drum technician, was grabbed by Gale and placed in a headlock. Police reported to the scene, and while Gale was distracted by the police units in front of him, another officer approached from behind via the stage's back door. The officer fired a single shotgun blast, killing Nathan Gale and freeing his hostage. Gale was found to still have 35 bullets left on him. In total, 5 people were killed, including the shooter and Dimebag Darrell. But Gale could have caused the deaths of many more that day, if not for the quick thinking and action of the police. Any fan of Ozzy Osbourne is likely to know the name of Randy Rhoads. Rhoads' energetic and frenetic style of play gave the start of Ozzy's solo career an incredibly distinct sound, as heard on hits such as Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley. Sadly, Rhoads would only be able to record 2 albums with Osbourne, as his life was cut short at only the age of 25. On March 19, 1982, while touring in Florida, Ozzy's bus stopped at a Leesburg, Florida airstrip in order to rest and fix a malfunctioning air conditioner unit on the bus. The tour bus driver, Andrew Aycock, noticed a single-engine aircraft on the strip, and being a former pilot, decided to take the plane for an unauthorized joyride. After making a successful flight with a few members of the band, Aycock decided to take a second flight with Rhoads and makeup artist Rachel Youngblood as passengers. Knowing that the rest of the group was sleeping, Aycock apparently decided to pull a prank on them and attempted to fly as close to the bus as possible in an act known as buzzing. Regrettably, this did not go well. On one of his passes over the bus, Aycock flew too close, striking the bus and breaking one of the wings. Not only did this immediately cause the plane to spiral out of control, the heavy impact pushed Youngblood's and Rhoads' heads into and through the plane's windshield. The plane continued onward, crashing through the top of a tree and eventually into the garage of a private mansion located near the property. All 3 were killed instantly, and in the resulting fire, burned to the point where only dental records could identify the bodies. Rhoads' legacy has lived on long after his death, being an inspiration to, and influence for, many hard rock guitarists.
The year 2016 has been a particularly tragic one in highlighting racial tensions between African Americans and the police in the United States. But these problems are hardly anything new. On July 30th, 1993, Don Myrick, saxophonist for Earth, Wind & Fire as well as Phil Collins, was having a search warrant administered to him by a Santa Monica policeman. The officer somehow mistook a lighter that Myrick was carrying in his hand for a gun and opened fire on the musician. He shot him once in the chest. Myrick was unable to survive the encounter and died later that day in the hospital. His surviving family was awarded $400,000 in a civil suit settlement with the city, but his wife is still denied her husband, their daughters denied their father, and the music world denied a remarkably talented man.
The Gits were a female-led Seattle punk band that emerged in the early 1990s behind the talent of their vocalist and songwriter, Mia Zapata. Their 1992 album, Frenching the Bully, was seen not only as an anthemic punk statement, but a statement of powerful femininity as well. On July 7th, 1993, the Gits were in the middle of recording their second album, Zapata lived close by to a popular local tavern in the Capitol Hill area of Seattle and was walking from the tavern to her home in the very early hours of the morning. She reportedly left the tavern at 2 a.m., and by the time 3:30 came, Zapata had been beaten, raped, strangled, and killed. Her body was found close enough to the tavern that a scream she let out during the attack was heard by a man at the tavern she had left earlier that night. Though her official cause of death was from being strangled, autopsy reports showed that she had been beaten so badly that even if she hadn't been strangled, she would have been unable to survive with the injuries she had sustained. 10 years went by before the case was solved, and in 2003, Jesus Mezquia was identified as her killer thanks to a DNA profile obtained from saliva on Zapata's body. Mezquia was not in the criminal DNA database at the time of Zapata's murder, but was later entered into it following a domestic abuse case in 2002. Zapata's memory remains alive and well in the hearts and minds of many Seattle musicians, past and present. The world of black metal and death metal has been plagued with some of the most gruesome and vile deaths in music history, but not all of the genre's musicians were lost that way. Terje Bakken was the founder and lead singer of Norwegian Viking metal band Windir. Their 4 studio albums are highly regarded for expanding upon the black metal sound by incorporating elements of Norwegian folk and melodic metal into their work. Bakken was also a talented multi-instrumentalist, able to play keyboards, drums, various guitars, and the accordion, in addition to his duties as a vocalist. On January 14th, Bakken went for a walk through the Sangel Valley toward his parents' house. Mysteriously, he never arrived there. Bakken went missing for 3 days before he was later found in the valley, dead from hypothermia. The singer had allegedly been caught in a vicious, sudden snowstorm and died from the exposure. Being the band's creative force, Windir did not continue onward, but a compilation album was released in 2005, dedicated to Bakken's memory.
A great many more musicians have been lost than just the ones listed here. Many from drug overdoses, others from suicide, others still merely from natural causes. It's important to note that their deaths are no less tragic, no less horrific to their loved ones and their fans. The ones we cover today are just some of the more bizarre, gruesome, and troubling. If you so choose, please honor the memories of some of these talented individuals by listening to their work and sampling the legacy they left behind for the world. Thank you for listening to this special episode of The Right Track. Please, let us know what you think of this darker theme leading up to Halloween and the scripted format. Your feedback is always appreciated. For myself, the Critical Android, and Nikki, until next time.